in the summer of 2021, my boyfriend Hannah and I decided to take a camping trip through rural Pennsylvania. We were both 27, stuck in dead-end jobs in Philadelphia, and needed to disconnect from the city noise before it swallowed us whole. Hannah had found this spot on an old adventure forum, an abandoned limestone quarry, about 3 hours north of Philly, supposedly deserted since the 1980s. The reviews made it sound perfect for primitive camping, totally isolated with these strange turquoise pools at the bottom where rainwater had been collecting for decades. We packed up my beat-up old Mazda with our tent sleeping bags and enough junk food for 3 days. Neither of us really grasped what we were driving toward. The drive up took us through winding mountain roads that got narrower and more suffocating with every mile. By the time we reached the dirt access road that cut through the pines, it was already late afternoon. GPS had dropped out about 30 minutes earlier, but we'd scribbled the directions down on a crumpled napkin. The road itself was barely wide enough for one car, just thick forest pressing in from both sides. Every pothole made our gear rattle in the trunk like loose bones. Hannah kept joking about horror movie setups, but I could tell she was starting to second-guess this brilliant idea. When we finally saw the rusted chain-link fence with the faded "No Trespassing" sign, we knew we'd found the place. Someone had cut a car-sized hole in the fence ages ago, and the tire tracks told us we weren't the first ones ignoring the warnings. The quarry itself was both beautiful and unsettling, massive limestone walls dropping away into a pit the size of a couple football fields. The late afternoon sun hit that pale stone just right, painting it in smears of orange and dusty pink. And at the bottom, just like the posts had promised, sat those pools, unnatural, milky blue-green. They didn't even look real. We found a flat spot to pitch our tent near the eastern edge, maybe 30 feet back from the drop-off. While I fumbled with the poles, Hannah wandered the rim, snapping photos on her phone, even though we didn't have signal to post them. She kept saying how quiet it was. No bird song, no bugs buzzing, just the occasional tick-tick of loose rocks tumbling into that deep pit. That should have been our first clue to turn back. But we were too stubborn. Too caught up in the thrill of having a whole forgotten place to ourselves. By the time the tent was up and we'd half burned our hot dogs over the campfire, darkness had settled in thick. Without city lights, the stars overhead felt sharp enough to cut. We sat on a blanket close to the rim, passing a cheap bottle of whiskey back and forth, feeling reckless and lucky. Hannah had brought her portable speaker, but when she tried to play music, the sound felt wrong, too loud, like it echoed back at us in ways it shouldn't. We shut it off after one song, weirdly relieved to hear nothing but our own breathing again. That's when we heard the voices. At first they were so faint I thought I was imagining them, low murmurs drifting up from the quarry floor. We both froze, trading nervous glances. I whispered that maybe someone else had shown up to party, but Hannah shook her head immediately. These voices weren't normal. They carried too far and too weird, the words lost in the stone walls, but the rhythm clear, like overhearing an argument through a door you can't open. She grabbed my arm and said, maybe we should go check if someone needed help, but my gut said no. Everything in my body was telling me not to move an inch closer to that edge. We sat there for what felt like forever, straining to pick out words, but it was just a blur. Voices coming and going, rising and dropping off, always just out of reach. Then they stopped. Just gone. Like someone flicked a switch. The silence they left behind felt heavier than the quarry itself. We didn't talk much after that. Just crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and lay there like that thin layer of fabric would keep the voices out. Sleep was useless. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made my pulse spike. Hannah kept tossing beside me, whispering she was cold even though the air felt thick and still. Around what I guessed was 3 a.m., I couldn't hold it any longer. I slipped out of the tent to pee, hoping the night air would clear my head. The moon was high, bathing everything in cold silver. The quarry walls glowed like teeth. As I stood there, I heard it a scream that started deep clawing its way out of the pit. Not a prank scream or a distant coyote. It was human raw, and it stopped dead mid-echo. I bolted back to the tent so fast I nearly tripped over the guy lines. Hannah was already sitting up, her eyes wide, breath shallow. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I could only nod. We didn't even pretend to sleep after that. We just lay there, ears straining for another sound that never came. At dawn, we packed up in silence. The quarry in daylight looked uglier, like an old wound in the earth. Hannah kept glancing over the edge, half expecting to see someone down there. I focused on cramming our stuff back into the car, too scared to look behind me. When we were almost done, Hannah called me over to a tree near where we'd parked. There, stapled under a clear plastic sleeve, was an old missing poster. A girl, maybe 17, braces on her smile. Amanda Price, missing since July 2004. The paper was yellowed but carefully protected. Scrawled in thick black marker at the bottom were 4 words. She heard them too. A few steps away, another tree, another sleeve, a different face, a boy with shaggy hair and a skateboard tucked under his arm. Daniel Ortiz, gone since 2011. Same words. He heard them too. We found 3 more on the short walk back to the car. All young faces. All last seen near this quarry. All with that same message. We didn't waste time. We threw the last of our gear into the trunk and tore down that dirt road so fast the branches clawed at the windows. 5 miles down, we saw an old ranger station and pulled in. The ranger on duty was this weathered guy named Ed, pushing 70 with a sunburn that looked permanent. When we told him where we'd camped, he didn't even try to hide his disapproval. "Bracken Hollow," he said, leaning back. "You two are lucky to be sitting here. Place has been bad news since before I was your age. Kids used to dare each other to climb down in the dark. Some didn't come back. Some, well, no one knows." He pulled out an old folder from his desk, yellowed clippings, blurry photos of search parties with dogs sniffing around those same limestone walls. States fenced it off a dozen times. Doesn't matter. People always find a way in. When we asked about the voices, Ed's eyes got distant. Some folks say it's just wind, echoes bouncing off the walls. But my granddad worked up here back when it was active. He said they called it the calling pit. Said if you heard it, you were already halfway gone. He said it so flatly that the chill I'd been trying to shake settled in for good. We thanked him and left. The drive home was quiet, both of us replaying that scream in our heads. Hannah and I didn't last much longer after that. It's not that the quarry ruined us more, like it dug something up we couldn't bury again. Sometimes years later, when I can't sleep, I think about those missing faces pinned to those trees. Who put them up? Who keeps them dry and neat after all this time? I wonder if they're a warning or a promise. I wonder if Amanda Price and Daniel Ortiz ever made it out, or if they're still down there whispering. I've never gone back. I never will. But sometimes when it's late and the world is too quiet, I swear I can still hear them calling my name. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, would you camp there or would you run hit, like if this gave you chills? Last August changed me forever. My name's Trevor, and I work as a freelance illustrator in Portland. Back in August 2024, my 2 closest friends from college, Jared and Simon, and I finally did what we'd been promising ourselves for a decade, a cross-country camping trip. We were all turning 31 that summer, and it felt like a now or never thing. Jared had just quit his startup job after a messy merger. Simon's girlfriend of 7 years had walked out in June, and I'd spent the entire spring chained to my desk, juggling 3 contracts to pay off my dad's medical debt. We were exhausted. We needed this. We planned out a route from Oregon to Maine, aiming to hit the best national parks and as many forgotten campgrounds as we could find. The plan was simple: drive all day, pitch camp before dark, take 1 photo at each site to mark our trail, and switch our brains off from the grind that was wearing us down. The first stretch was exactly what we'd hoped for. That first week, we started at Crater Lake, then cut through Idaho and wound our way to Yellowstone. Every evening, we'd claim our spot hammer down the stakes, and Jared would fuss over his new DSLR. He'd saved up for months just to buy it for this trip. He said he wanted high-res memories. We'd stand shoulder to shoulder in front of the tent, arms looped around each other's backs, grinning like idiots while the timer ticked down. Then we'd huddle over the camera to check if the shot was good, if the light caught us right, if nobody had blinked. For a few seconds every night, we were just 3 dumb kids again. By the time we crossed into Colorado, we were a well-oiled machine wake with the Dawn Pack camp roll for hours, listening to old playlists and true crime podcasts find the next patch of wilderness before sunset. The campgrounds were never the same. Some overrun with RV families and barking dogs, others so deep in the backwoods we felt like we were the last people on Earth. Jared would dump the day's photos onto his laptop every night to keep his memory card clear. We'd talk about putting them into a coffee table book when we got home, something to show our future kids when they were old enough to roll their eyes at us. The weather stayed perfect. Simon, who barely spoke the first few days, loosened up in Colorado, cracking dumb jokes, pointing out weird roadside billboards, suggesting we detour for world's largest something or other. Then came Missouri Day 10. That night still crawls into my dreams sometimes. We found a small campground just outside Mark Twain National Forest, maybe 15 sites total. Only 2 others were taken, both older couples in weather-beaten RVs far from our patch. The trees pressed in thick insects droned everywhere. The air felt heavy and wet. As we staked down the tent, this prickling chill kept crawling up my neck like someone was behind me. But every time I spun around, nothing but trees. Jared complained about losing light as he fiddled with his settings. Simon was trying to coax dry twigs into a half-decent fire. Everything looked normal, but something in that dusk felt off. We did our photo just as the sun dropped behind the tree line, gold and dying light bleeding through the branches. Jared had to bump the ISO so high the photos looked grainy. We redid the shot twice because the shadows looked weird. The last time, as the timer was about to click, a branch snapped somewhere past the tripod, loud and clear like a footstep. Simon jerked mid-smile. Jared grabbed the camera to check if we'd turned toward the sound, but he barely looked. Mosquitoes were chewing us alive and we were starving. He said he'd check it later. I couldn't sleep that night. We all crawled into our sleeping bags early, the forest pressing so close the darkness felt alive. Simon's steady breathing was the only thing that kept me calm. We reached Nebraska 3 nights later, a shady little campground near the Niobrara River. That place felt like a dream, in daylight, open fields, the sun flickering on water prairie grass, dancing in the wind. We stripped down and swam for hours like kids at summer camp. At dusk, we pitched the tent on a small bluff with the river in the distance. No other campers nearby, just wide open space. Jared was fussing with his camera again, muttering that the lens looked smudged even though he'd cleaned it twice that morning. We snapped the photo anyway, standing shoulder to shoulder against the wind rattling the tripod. Jared said he'd check them when he had better light. Night 13, Iowa. One of those tiny family-run places, a faded sign nailed to a fence post, an honesty box nailed next to it. The old lady who ran it, Evelyn, gave us the farthest spot. Nice and quiet for you boys, she'd said. Quiet didn't cover it. Cornfields in every direction, and the silence out there was like holding your breath underwater. We set up camp just as the sun scorched the sky, pink and orange. Jared was obsessed with the light made us move 3 times to dodge a utility pole. When we finally took the shot, a flock of blackbirds exploded out of the corn so suddenly I thought something big was about to tear through the stalks. That night the wind didn't blow, but the corn still rustled. None of us slept. Simon thrashed and mumbled in his sleep. Jared kept getting up to piss each time, staying gone too long. I just lay there, eyes wide, counting my heartbeat. Sometime past 3, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful. They circled the tent once, then stopped right behind my head. I could hear breathing through the nylon, slow, steady. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. After what felt like an hour, the footsteps padded off toward the corn. I stayed awake until dawn. I never told the guys. We broke camp in record time that morning. Nobody said it, but we all felt it. By the time we rolled into Wisconsin 2 days later, we were pretending nothing was wrong. The new campground sat beside a glassy little lake ringed with pine trees. Families were scattered all around, kids yelling, dogs barking, normal life. After Iowa, it felt like armor. We found a site near the water not too far from the camp host's old RV. As we unpacked, Jared finally pulled out his laptop to dump the photos he'd put off transferring. I was blowing on the fire pit when I heard him choke like he'd swallowed a spark. Simon and I ran over. Jared had the Missouri photo up, zoomed in behind the tent. Between the trees, partly hidden, was a figure, just standing there. He flipped to Nebraska, zoomed in. Same thing. Far back on the river's edge, a dark smudge of a man. Same build, same posture. The Iowa shot was worse. The figure was closer, just at the edge of the corn, maybe 50 feet behind us. Tall, dark clothes, hands hanging at his sides, watching. We flipped through every shot, our breath coming faster. He was in 3 more: Wyoming, South Dakota, Minnesota. Always different distances, always the same stance. Simon wanted to leave right then. Jared was muttering to himself, scrolling through the card for any shot we'd missed. I just stared out at the water, half expecting to see him standing knee-deep in the shallows, watching. We stayed. Running felt pointless. He'd already crossed half the country with us. We moved our tent closer to the host's RV and took shifts staying up. During my watch, maybe 2 a.m., I saw someone walk past the bathhouse lights, tall, slow, deliberate. They never turned toward me, just drifted to the edge of the floodlight and stopped. By the time Jared got his camera out, they were gone. We didn't sleep. We sat by the embers, twitching at every snap of pine cone. At dawn, we made the only decision that made sense: no more east, no more photos. Just drive straight back to Portland, no stops except gas. Jared took one last picture of our empty site, said we'd want proof. We drove 28 hours straight, chain-drinking gas station coffee, taking turns behind the wheel, while the other 2 half slept with eyes open. Back in Portland, we sat on my living room floor and pulled up that last photo. The campsite was empty, perfectly normal. Except in the reflection of an RV side mirror, a face, watching. We never printed the photos. Jared wiped them all except the last one. He keeps it on an encrypted drive. We don't talk about it when we're together, but every once in a while one of us will ask, "Seen him lately?" So far, the answer's always been no, but I still check my mirrors every time I drive. and I haven't set foot in a tent since. I was 32 when I finally decided enough was enough. Left my marketing job in Portland, sold half my junk on Facebook Marketplace, and turned my beat-up 2007 Chevy Tahoe into my traveling home. April 2023 found me 3 weeks deep into what was supposed to be a 6-month solo road trip. That night, I was parked at the Salmon River Trailhead, about 3 hours east of the city. The lot was gravel hidden between giant Douglas firs that stretched their arms overhead like guardians. Perfect place, really, just enough bars of signal to pretend I'd check work emails, but far enough off the map that I hadn't seen another human since pulling in right before sunset. I'd gotten used to the quiet by then, after weeks of nights behind Walmart and Love's Truck. Stops you figure out quick which places feel good and which ones set off that primal alarm in your spine. This spot felt right. That evening was one of those textbook Pacific Northwest spring nights. The rain held off long enough for me to boil ramen on my camp stove while the sky over the mountains turned every shade of gold and copper. By 9, I was burrowed into my makeshift bed in the back of the Tahoe, listening to the soft patter of new rain on the roof and a murder podcast that, looking back, might not have been the smartest bedtime soundtrack. My Tahoe was my fortress. I'd perfected my set-up blackout curtains velcroed tight to every window battery fan for airflow bear spray within arm's reach, keys dangling right above my pillow. Always parked nose out for an easy escape. Crack the windows just enough for air. And most important, never ignore that voice that says something's wrong. The knocking started at 12:43 a.m. I remember the exact time because my phone screen lit up when I jolted awake. 3 hard measured knocks on the driver's side window. Not a tap, not someone hesitating, but the kind of knock that expects you to jump up and open the door. Through the thick blackout curtain, I saw a flashlight beam sweeping across my windshield. For half a second, I thought maybe a park ranger or county cop doing a late-night check. But something in me stayed dead still. I didn't reach for the curtain. I didn't breathe too loud. Another 3 knocks, louder, now sharper. Then a man's voice, muffled but clear enough through the glass. "Miss Forest Service. Need to talk to you about your camping permit." It sounded official, too official. The way you'd say it if you'd been practicing it in your bathroom mirror. I pressed my back into my sleeping bag, trying to quiet my heartbeat. Through the tiny slit where the curtain didn't quite close, I saw him broad shoulders in what looked like a tan uniform shirt, 6 feet or so. Boots planted like he owned the gravel under them. The flashlight beam jerked around, searching for a gap in my coverings. "Ma'am, I know you're in there," he called again. The politeness leaking out of his voice replaced by something sharp and thin. "We've had a complaint about illegal camping. I'm gonna need you to step out so we can clear this up." Every nerve I had went cold. Rangers don't check trailheads at 1 in the morning. They don't come alone. They don't stand there with a cheap flashlight and no marked vehicle in sight. I slid my hand under my blanket, grabbed my phone. Bright screen nearly blinded me. I turned the brightness down, forced my breathing to stay steady. "Miss, don't make this difficult," he barked. The flashlight froze, pointed dead at where my face would be if I pulled back the curtain. "Step out now and we can get you on your way. Or we can do this the hard way. Big fine, maybe tow your truck." I could hear his boots crunch closer. I could practically feel him at my door. My thumb hovered over 911. My mouth felt dry as sand. "Can I see your badge first?" I called out, making my voice flat, businesslike. "Before I open anything, I'd like to see your ID and badge number." Silence. The flashlight dipped. For a heartbeat, he didn't say a word. Then, voice tight with something ugly, he shot back, "Badges in my vehicle." Just step out and we'll handle it there. He stepped closer. I heard the handle on my door rattle, my mom's voice in my head. Always lock your doors, always. That sound metal on metal, that click-click, flipped something in me from scared to furious. I jabbed the call button. The 911 dispatcher's voice filled my Tahoe like salvation. 911, what's your emergency? I practically shouted into the phone. I'm at the Salmon River trailhead. There's a man claiming to be Forest Service. He won't show ID. He's trying to get me out of my truck. Please send help. Through the slit in the curtain, I saw his head snap up. The flashlight beam swung wildly. Then he was backing away so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. This isn't necessary, he shouted, but his voice cracked raw panic where the fake authority had been. I'll just leave a warning. Check with the ranger station tomorrow. But he wasn't reaching for a ticket book. He wasn't walking to a truck. He turned on his heel and bolted straight into the trees. His flashlight beam bounced wildly among the trunks before the dark swallowed him whole. Ma'am, are you there? The dispatcher's calm voice dragged me back from the edge. Yes, I whispered, my voice shaking so bad I barely recognized it. He's gone. He ran into the woods. Please, just get someone here. She stayed with me on the line, talking soft, asking for every detail. What did he look like? How tall? Any vehicle? Any plates? I kept replaying it. Tan shirt. Too big, voice too smooth at first, then cracked and nasty when he didn't get what he wanted. I realized I hadn't seen a single other car when I'd pulled in. He could have parked half a mile up the road and just waited for someone like me. It took nearly an hour for the real deputy to get there, Deputy Ethan Ramirez, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. Marked SUV, real badge, real uniform that fit. I nearly sobbed when I cracked my window for him. He and his partner did a full sweep, but found nothing except fresh boot prints where the man had vanished into the woods. You did exactly what you should have, Ramirez, told me, his face grim under the beam of my flashlight. We've had reports about someone impersonating officers around the National Forest. He's never gotten this close before. Next morning, I drove straight to the ranger station in Zigzag, still running on zero sleep. The ranger, Lisa Garrison, 20 years on the job, listened to my story with her lips pressed in a tight line. When I described the fake uniform and how he rattled my handle, she pulled out a map and spread it flat on the counter. Red X's all over it, trailheads, pull-offs, tiny hidden campsites. You're the first to actually hear him speak, she said, voice low. Before he just watched, stayed hidden. But this means he's getting bolder. She thanked me for my statement, gave me a number to call if I remembered anything else, and I promised I would. But we both knew the truth. The second I locked that Tahoe that night, my trip was over. I finished out my month on the road, but I stuck to big campgrounds, never more than a few sites from other people. When I got back to Bend, I sold the Tahoe the same week I signed a lease. And every night since, I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, not because I think he'll find me here, but because I know now that some people will go farther than you ever think, just waiting for you to open the door. Stay safe out there, and if you made it to the end of this, tell me in the comments. Would you have opened the door? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit follow if you want more stories like this one. This happened back in September 2020 when my daughter Emma was 11 and still thought camping with her dad was the greatest adventure on earth. Back then, I was managing inventory at a distribution center in Atlanta, working insane shifts and barely seeing my family. My wife, Megan, kept reminding me how fast Emma was growing up, how soon she'd hit that age where parents were just an embarrassment to be avoided. So when I finally got a rare 3-day weekend, I booked us a spot at a remote campground up in the North Georgia mountains about 2 hours from the city. It was called Whispering Pines, which probably should have tipped me off, but I was just excited to shut my phone off, build a fire, and show Emma how to toast a marshmallow the right way. We pulled in late Friday afternoon, and the place was almost empty. The ranger at the check-in shack, an older guy named Gus with nicotine-stained teeth and a wandering left eye, told us we pretty much had the run of the place since most summer campers were long gone. He suggested Site 52, way back at the edge of the loop, where the trees grew so thick you couldn't see another tent for 50 yards. Emma was thrilled she'd been binging survival shows and was determined to test out her bushcraft skills without nosy campers watching her tie sloppy knots. We set up our old green Coleman tent on a carpet of pine needles, Emma fussing over the sleeping bags while I dragged over logs for the fire pit. That first night was perfect. We burned our hot dogs black, stuffed ourselves on s'mores with extra chocolate. Emma snuck into the cart, and I told her stories about camping trips I'd gone on as a kid, how my dad used to scare me with tales of owls that could steal your voice if you talked too loud at night. She fell asleep halfway through one of those stories, her hair stuck to her forehead with melted marshmallow. I stayed up a while, just soaking up the silence, the kind you only get when you're hours from the nearest highway, when even your own thoughts sound louder than the woods. An owl hooted somewhere far off the fire, popped, and I crawled into the tent around midnight, drifting off into that deep, pine-scented sleep you only get outdoors. Saturday was even better. We found the creek Gus had told us about. Emma spent almost 2 hours crouched in the shallows trying to catch minnows with her bare hands while I napped against a sun-warmed boulder. We found what she swore were bear tracks. They looked like dog prints to me, but I played along. Dinner was campfire pizza in my dented cast-iron skillet. Emma claimed it was better than the one we get delivered every Friday. We were both beat when darkness fell, that good tired that makes your bones ache in a way that feels right. By 9:15, we were zipped into our sleeping bags, already planning a sunrise hike for the next morning. The tapping started at exactly 2:04 a.m. I remember the time because I squinted at my watch the instant it yanked me from a dead sleep. It was this soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap against the tent wall right by Emma's head. 3 beats a pause, 3 more. Too regular to be rain, it sounded more like someone drumming their fingers on a table when they're waiting for something. Emma was out, cold mouth open, snoring just a little. I lay there perfectly still for maybe a minute, listening. The tapping moved, same rhythm, same pressure, but sliding around the side of the tent like someone was slowly circling us with one hand brushing the fabric as they crept. My first thought was raccoons, sneaky little scavengers always poking around for snacks, but raccoons chatter grunt make a mess. This was quiet, intentional. I eased my arm over Emma's sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and unzipped the tent flap as quietly as I could. The second I touched the zipper, the tapping stopped, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was listening. I stuck my head out, flashlight beam slicing the darkness. Nothing. No eyes reflecting back. No rustling in the underbrush. Even the bugs were silent. No crickets, no frogs, just the faint crackle of our dead fire and my own breathing. I stepped out barefoot, flinching at the cold dirt under my soles. I made a slow circle of our site, peering into the trees, sweeping my light up the trunks just in case. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. Not a branch out of place. Finally, I convinced myself it had to be wind, or a branch, or maybe I'd dreamed it all together. I zipped up, crawled back into my bag, told myself to let it go. But that gut feeling, the kind you get when you know someone's staring at you from the dark, wouldn't let me drift off. I lay there gripping the flashlight, listening to the tiny pops and snaps of the forest. After what felt like half an hour, my eyelids got heavy. I was right on the edge of sleep when the tapping came back. Same spot. Same deliberate tap, tap, tap. Except this time, it was on my side of the tent. I didn't waste time. I burst out so fast I nearly tore the zipper off flashlight, stabbing at the trees, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a raccoon or a prankster something. But the woods were empty. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just that same crushing silence pressing in from every side. The tapping didn't come back after that, but I sure didn't sleep. I sat up in my bag, back to the tent wall, flashlight in my lap, eyes on Emma's peaceful face. Around 5 a.m., with the sky starting to gray, I heard its footsteps in the leaves, slow and heavy, crunching in a wide circle around our tent before fading toward the main trail. By the time I dared peek out again, the birds had started chirping, and everything looked so normal, I felt stupid for ever being afraid. Emma popped up, cheerful as ever, asking what was for breakfast. I didn't tell her about the tapping, didn't want to ruin her fun. We unzipped the flap together and stepped out into the chilly dawn. That's when we saw them 5 pine cones arranged in a perfect circle right outside our tent door. Not scattered like they'd fallen placed. Each cone exactly the same distance from the next, fresh and sticky with sap. I knew enough about the woods to know these were from white pines, long, slender cones. But all around us, only loblolly pines, short, stubby cones. The closest white pines were a good quarter-mile away. Someone or something had carried them here, in the dark. While I sat inside, clutching my flashlight, Emma thought it was hilarious. She asked if I'd made a wilderness art project while she slept. I just nodded and told her to brush her teeth at the water spigot while I packed up. I headed over to the only other campsite I knew was occupied about 50 yards through the trees. A retired couple from South Carolina, Beth and Frank, were sipping instant coffee. I asked real casual if they'd heard anything weird overnight. Beth perked right up, said she'd woken around 2 a.m. to footsteps moving between the tents, heavy footsteps pausing at intervals. Frank said he'd stepped out with a flashlight, but didn't see a soul, figured it was just Gus checking the sights. Except when they asked Gus about it at sunrise, he'd told them he never patrols after 10. He'd been home asleep. I nearly dragged Emma back to the car right then. We stuffed everything in the trunk so fast I forgot to pack the skillet. As we were strapping in, Gus rolled up in his golf cart, that same easy grin plastered on his face. I mentioned the pine cone circle, half laughing like it was a joke. The grin vanished. He leaned in close and muttered that he'd gotten similar reports for weeks, tapping on tents, weird arrangements, heavy footsteps always out by the far sites, always Saturday nights, always when his logbook said nobody else was booked nearby. We were gone 10 minutes later. Emma dozed the whole drive back, blissfully unaware. Back home, I sat up late that night and read every forum post I could find about Whispering Pines. Stories going back years, tapping sounds, footprints that led nowhere, little objects arranged in patterns just outside people's tents. One post from 2017 stuck with me, a guy who set up a trail cam to catch whatever was messing with his tent. He woke up to find the camera turned to face the trunk of a tree. The memory card gone. I still haven't told Emma the real story. She asks sometimes when we'll go camping again. I just blame my work schedule, say we'll plan it soon. But the truth is, sometimes when I'm drifting off at home, I swear I hear it again. That soft, patient tap, 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 like whoever was out there under those trees is still waiting, biding their time, and they'll tap again when they're ready. If you read this far, tell me in the comments, would you ever spend a night alone in those woods? If you'd be brave enough, hit like and share your answer below. My name's Caleb, and at 36, I'd been fighting fires out of Sacramento for almost 10 years. Every year, right at the tail end of September, when the worst of fire season gave us a breather, I'd carve out a week for myself. No pager, no radios, no sirens, just me and the wilderness. It was my ritual to burn off the smoke and adrenaline that clung to my brain long after the last embers were out. That year, 2021, I'd picked a slice of remote heaven in the Marble Mountain Wilderness up in Northern California. The plan was simple push in solo for 2 days to reach Sapphire Lake, a high alpine spot that didn't even show up on most trail maps. It was my favorite kind of place, the sort you had to earn. 15 miles of rough trail, steep switchbacks, no signposts, no crowds. Perfect. The hike in was everything I'd hoped for. Crisp mornings that warmed into soft, golden afternoons, the hush of early fall drifting through the pines. A few Steller's jays barking at me from the canopy, a glimpse of a black bear nosing around a sunlit meadow maybe 100 yards off the trail, reminders that I wasn't truly alone, but alone enough. By my second evening, I'd made it to Sapphire Lake. It looked like something out of a dream-cold, glass-clear water where I could see trout drifting lazily over the rocky bottom and towering Douglas firs rising all around like the walls of a cathedral no human could ever build. I found a flat patch of ground about 50 feet from the shore tucked between 2 giant trees that must have been alive when my great-grandparents were kids. The closest road was at least 20 miles behind me. The last other human I'd seen was a day and a half ago. A solo backpacker headed the opposite direction with a tired smile and a nod. I pitched my tent, stashed my food, then grabbed my hatchet and set off to gather wood. The Forest Service allowed small campfires up here, so long as you kept them in the established stone rings at the lake. I wanted to cook up my freeze-dried stew over actual flame, let the smell drift out into the dark. I was maybe 200 yards from my tent, following a faint deer trail through the brush when I spotted it. White metal tucked half out of sight behind a cluster of low-hanging branches and a screen of ferns. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. It was the side of a van, not a camper or an old VW bus. No, this was a plain white panel van like the kind a plumber or a contractor would drive, no side windows, just the big sliding door. My brain stumbled over it. How? There were no roads, no old logging paths, not even the suggestion of a fire road out here. The hiking trail was single file for half its length. Not even an ATV could squeeze through. I ducked through the ferns and stepped closer. Sure enough, there it was. A whole damn Ford Transit parked deep in the trees like it had fallen out of the sky. Pine needles blanketed the roof and hood. The tires were sunk into the soft earth caked with old mud. I saw gouges on the trunks of nearby trees, deep scrapes where bark had been torn away, like the van had been wedged in by brute force. I circled it, trying to make sense of it. The doors were locked. I pressed my face to the driver's window. Nothing but shadow inside, though I could just make out shapes in the back. Equipment, maybe tools. No keys, no bags, no fast food wrappers, not even a map in the glove box. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt hidden. I spent another 10 minutes combing the ground around it. Broken branches, scuffed soil, bent saplings. It looked like something big had pushed through here, but the terrain just didn't make sense. It was all sheer grades and rocky cuts. I'd helped winch trucks out of impossible backcountry during fires, but even with a bulldozer, you wouldn't get a van this far without leaving a trail like a war zone. And yet here, it was no sign of tracks beyond the immediate clearing. Just this ghost van sitting under the pines. I snapped some photos on my phone. No signal, obviously, but muscle memory kicked in. Document weird stuff first, ask questions later. I started back toward camp arms full of kindling, but my head kept looping back to that metal shape tucked in the trees. Who dragged a van this deep into the wild? Why here? What the hell for? I got my fire going, boiled water for the stew. I should have felt good alone with the stars, no radio chatter, no sirens. But the quiet wasn't soft anymore. Every gust through the canopy made me lift my head. Every crack of underbrush brought my hand to the hatchet at my feet. I'd packed my sidearm too standard when you solo camp in bear country. It was usually buried in my pack. But that night, I unzipped the tent flap and tucked the holster right by my sleeping bag. Maybe paranoid, or maybe that gut-level instinct that's kept me alive in burning buildings more than once. Night came quick under that thick canopy. I ate in silence, listening to the lake lap the shore. Then just as I was stirring the last embers of my fire, I saw it. A faint glow deep in the trees, right where the van sat. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, but there it was, the unmistakable dull dome light of a vehicle flicking on. Off. On again. I killed my headlamp and let my eyes adjust. The glow stayed steady for a bit, flickered, then winked out. Nothing but blackness again. No footsteps, no voices. The forest sounds washed over me, owls, water a few rustles too small to track. But I swear the quiet felt different. I waited maybe 20 minutes, frozen heart drumming in my throat. Then I couldn't take it. I had to know. I slipped my boots on, tucked my pistol into my belt, and moved slow heel to toe like they teach you in wildfire training so you don't trip over branches in the dark. Halfway to the van, I heard it. A soft thud, the unmistakable sound of a car door closing. Not slammed carefully shut. Then a second. My mouth went dry. I dropped behind a massive fur belly to the cold dirt. Through the black, I saw two shapes. Men. Tall, broad. They weren't fumbling around like lost hikers, they moved like they belonged there. Big flashlights sliced through the dark in neat practiced arcs. They were searching for what I didn't know, but they swept the beams in slow, methodical sweeps like they were hunting sign. One of them murmured something to the other, low-clipped all business. The tone tickled a memory training exercise's squad drills. It was the way men talk when they know the ground and know what they're looking for. Law enforcement, military, maybe. But no agency I knew of dragged a stolen panel van 20 miles off grid. One of them angled closer. I felt the beam crawl up the trunk I was pressed against. 30 feet. 20. I squeezed the pistol grip, praying I wouldn't need to use it. They were so close I heard the crunch of boots on pine needles, the faint click of a radio. Static. Then a voice, garbled but answering. The man grunted and turned away. I stayed pressed against that tree until my legs went numb. Finally, both men drifted back to the van. I heard more muffled talk, then a metallic shuffle gear moving. Then something worse they didn't leave. They laid out sleeping bags just feet from the van's sliding door. One kept watch, flashlight in hand. The other climbed into his bag. They were waiting. For who or what had hit me then, I couldn't stay. I couldn't be here when they came looking again. Inch by inch, I backed out one boot at a time. It took an hour to cover 200 yards. I felt every heartbeat in my teeth. Back at camp, I packed blind. No headlamp, just my hands working by memory. Sleeping bag rations, sidearm. I left the tent, the cookware, anything that would zip, clank, or catch light. I shouldered my pack and slipped into the dark feet, finding the trail by touch alone. The creek at my right shoulder was my lifeline. As long as I heard its low rush, I knew I was going the right way. Every rustle behind me was a phantom footstep. Every snapping branch, a radio crackle. I didn't breathe until the first pale line of dawn bled through the canopy. By then, I was 8 miles out. My thighs were screaming lungs raw, but I kept moving until I hit cell signal just shy of the trailhead. 1 bar was all I needed. The dispatcher on the other end sounded skeptical. A van in the middle of nowhere, armed men. But my voice must have told her enough. She got my coordinates, told me deputies and Forest Service rangers were already inbound. By noon, I was at my truck, shoes muddy to the ankles. 2 deputies and a ranger waited for me. I handed over the photos, the coordinates, everything. 3 days later, the lead detective called. They found the van right where I'd said, but the men were gone. The Transit had been reported stolen from Eugene, Oregon 2 weeks prior. Inside, they found zip ties, duct tape, 2 unregistered pistols, plus enough kit to restrain someone for a long time. DNA evidence linked those 2 to a string of missing solo hikers from California to southern Oregon. The detective didn't say it outright, but I could read between the lines that van was a trap, a base a cage. They'd built it out here piece by piece, in a place no sane person would ever stumble across. Except I did. I haven't solo hiked since. When I hit the trails now, I bring friends. I watch the tree lines the way I watch burning rooftops for signs of collapse you can't take back. Some things once seen don't leave you. The forest is still beautiful, but sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I swear I hear the click of a radio, deep between the trees. Some stories never really end. They just wait for the next hiker to wander by. If you made it this far, tell me, would you have kept walking or looked inside that van? Leave a comment below and share this if you'd want someone to watch your back. I'd been feeling burned out for months, stuck in that dead zone, where every shot through my viewfinder felt like a tired echo of the last one. The kind of dry spell that makes you wonder if you're done for good. So I figured some real solitude might rinse my brain clean. I packed up my Nikon, borrowed an old 2-person tent from my cousin, threw in a week's supply of freeze-dried noodles, and drove west until every station on the dial fizzed out to static. Big Bend had been on my list forever. Vast, merciless, and so quiet it felt like it could bleach the noise out of my head. I staked out a lonely patch of scrub a few miles off the main trail, a place so empty the rangers probably only swing by once or twice a month. No service, no neighbors, just the hiss of wind scraping heat over stone. That first day was exactly what I'd needed. I hiked until my legs were jelly, filled up 2 cards with golden ridges and dusty cactus skeletons, then sat by the fire while the desert sighed around me. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I crashed hard, that deep, empty sleep you only get when the sun's beaten you half to death. Day 2 was a carbon copy. Wake up, eat something bland, hike, shoot, repeat. But that night, the desert changed. The wind that had rattled the tent, flapped the night before, went dead, calm, leaving the air inside heavy and close, like the ground itself was holding its breath. I was half drifting that weird stage where your thoughts smear together when I heard it, clear as if someone was crouched right outside the paper-thin wall. A voice, soft, careful, right by my ear. Ethan. My eyes flew open. For a minute, I didn't move, didn't even breathe. That whisper hadn't bloomed up from some dream. It didn't fade or echo. It landed right there in the darkness, too close, too real. I sat up slow, straining so hard for any sound that my own heartbeat felt deafening. Nothing. Just dry, ancient quiet pressing down. I cracked the zipper an inch and peeked out. The fire was just embers now pulsing orange. The scrub and rocks beyond barely shifted. No footsteps, no shapes. I told myself it was exhaustion, my brain coughing up my own name just to fill the silence. But sleep stayed far away after that. When the sun dragged itself up, I boiled stale coffee and made myself circle the tent part, habit part, self-reassurance. That's when I found it. Just behind the far corner, a single boot print pressed clean into the loose sand. Narrow, cross-hatched tread, nothing like the heavy lug soles of my hiking boots. I crouched there forever staring. No other tracks, no scuff marks leading in or out, just that one perfect step pointed at my tent, like whoever made it came close, stopped, and disappeared. I tried to work it out of my head by staying busy. I loaded up my pack and pushed deeper into the back trails camera out, shutter snapping. But every time I lifted my lens, my eyes kept sliding sideways, half expecting to catch a shape ducking behind the brush. Of course, there was nothing, just the desert's empty grin. That night, the thought of a fire made my skin itch. I ate dry trail mix straight out of the bag, zipped myself inside the tent long before dusk, and clipped my headlamp to the ceiling so the shadows couldn't sneak up on me. Around midnight, I started to hear it faint, deliberate crunches on loose rock. One step. Pause. Another. Too slow for a deer. Too steady for any coyote or stray javelina. I gripped the cheap folding knife I kept by my sleeping bag until my fingers ached. I told myself it was my mind playing with static, turning the desert's shifting sounds into footsteps. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't the wind. I didn't sleep at all. At dawn, I packed up like the scrubland was about to swallow me whole. My knees felt hollow. The walk back to the ranger station felt longer than the drive in. The ranger on shift that morning was an older guy named Roy Deep Crow's feet-faded uniform, the polite patience of someone who's heard every dumb camper story there is. When I told him about the voice and the print, I braced for a shrug, maybe a theory about a prank, a passing hiker, but he didn't shrug. He just looked at me for a long time, jaw working, like he was deciding whether to say what was on his mind. "That campsite you picked, was it near Grapevine Hills?" he asked finally. I nodded. Roy leaned back, thumb hooked through his belt. 3 years back, early March, another solo camper. Same area, never came home. They found his gear tent, staked down, neat fire pit, cold camera still zipped in the bag. Just gone. That was enough to chill me. But then, he rummaged through a dusty cabinet and pulled out a warped file folder. A photocopied missing persons report, sun-yellowed and bent at the corners. The name on the paper stopped me cold. Ethan Ward, 35, photographer. Vanished on the second night of his solo trip. Same month, same patch of desert. My scalp prickled so hard it hurt. I asked if they'd ever found him or his body or even a clue. Roy just shook his head. Big Ben doesn't give back what it doesn't want to. I asked if anyone had ever heard anything strange out there, voices, echoes, things you can't pin down. Roy didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "Folks say the desert remembers. Sometimes it repeats." I didn't take a single detour on the drive out. Didn't stop for one last shot of the ridges burning in sunset light. I just kept the wheel locked straight until the radio static bled back to music and the desert slipped out of my rear view. I dumped every photo from that trip onto a hard drive when I got home, then shoved it in the back of my closet. It's still there. I haven't opened it once. Some nights I stand in the hallway staring at the closet door, half tempted to dig it out, and half certain that if I do, I'll hear that whisper again. A few weeks later, I dug through missing persons archives online. There are other disappearances, sure, but none that lined up like Ethan's did. Same name, same trails, same camera, same vanishing point. Sometimes I wonder if the whisper I heard wasn't a warning, but a leftover piece of him, whatever scrap the desert let through the seams. I still can't sleep near an open window. Still flinch when I hear my name called too softly behind me. I don't camp solo anymore. I don't shoot desert landscapes. If Roy was right, if the land out there does echo, I figure it's still echoing that man's unfinished story. And maybe next time, it'll want someone to finish it. If you'd stay out there after hearing this, tell me in the comments. And if you'd run like I did, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. The diesel stink never really leaves your hands, even if you scrub till your skin cracks. I'm Colton Reese, 34 now, and back when this happened, I'd been turning wrenches on semis out of Missoula for nearly a decade. It was late October 2023, right before the first real snow hits the Bitterroot Range. My wife, Lena, and I had just had our first kid, a little girl. Hattie, barely 4 months old, already had her mama's eyes and my temper. This solo hunt was supposed to be my last breath of freedom before a winter of diapers and night feedings. I'd picked this stretch of national forest because nobody sane hunts there. Too steep, too many deadfalls, but that's exactly where the old wise bulls like to vanish when the rifles come out. That morning was perfect. Cold air, no wind, fresh sign everywhere. I'd hiked maybe 5 miles in boots soft on pine needles, just soaking up how deep and empty the world felt out there. It was quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then my left boot snagged something that shouldn't have been there. I hit the dirt. Hard rifle clanged off the rock's knee, slammed a rotten log so hard I saw sparks behind my eyes. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist. What tripped me was a length of olive paracord stretched tight at ankle height between 2 lodge poles. Brand new. Military grade. Knotted so clean you'd think an instructor had done it for a demo. First thought, some other hunter marking a spot. But no hunter rigs a trip line knee-high across a game trail. That was no marker. That was meant to drop a man on his face. All the little hairs on my neck were standing straight up now. I forced myself to scan the slope ahead instead of sprinting back to my truck like my gut was begging me to do. And there, about 30 yards uphill, half hidden behind a massive Douglas fir, was a tree stand. Portable climbing stand, sure, but pointed the wrong way, not toward any clear cut or bedding area. It was aimed right down the ridge at the tripwire I'd just hit. Hanging on a branch next to it, a pair of binoculars, big matte green military surplus. Below the stand, scattered like squirrel leavings, were fresh wrappers, protein bars, jerky Gatorade bottles. Somebody was camping up here, watching, and they'd been here real recent. That's when the forest went dead. No birds, no wind. Just that crushing silence that says you are not alone. I limped up to the tree rifle tucked tight to my chest. Ladder rungs were polished smooth from boots going up and down, in the dirt tracks, deep wide, maybe size 12, military tread. Half buried under needles, my boot nudged something stiff, a camo tarp covering supply crates. MREs, ammo boxes, purification tablets. This was no weekend deer camp. Someone had built themselves a damn outpost. I started backing away slow. Every instinct I'd learned in 20 years of hunting screamed the same thing, leave. But every other step showed me more. Another line strung between aspens. Discolored dirt, a buried stash maybe. A game cam way up a pine trunk pointed straight at where I'd come in. I was already on camera, being watched by whoever lived here. Back on the main trail, I moved fast, not running, not yet, but my knee burned, and my heartbeat felt too big for my chest. Every broken twig behind me sounded like a boot step. Every black shadow between the trees felt like a man standing there grinning. A mile out, I nearly nailed another trip line, this one with tiny bells threaded into it. If I'd hit it, Every creature in that forest would have heard. Whoever set this up had layers a damn perimeter. Not your average loner with a camp stove. This was someone with training. I nearly ran the last mile and a half back to my truck. When I finally spotted my old Silverado sitting quiet under the pines like a lifeboat, I damn near sobbed. I threw my pack in, fired up the engine, and didn't look back once until I hit the logging road. The whole drive down to the ranger station in Darby took 2 hours, and every mile I argued with myself about what to say. Part of me wanted to forget. It'd pretend I'd seen nothing. But the idea of some dad or kid wandering into that spider web that ate at me more than the fear did. When I rolled into the station, sweat cold on my back, the only ranger on duty, Brian Kerrigan, a guy I knew from buying elk tags, took one look at me and went dead serious. I spilled everything: the wires, the stand, the food, the way it was pointed at me, not game. He listened real quiet, then made some calls he didn't explain. Within an hour, the place turned into a hive sheriff's deputies, then guys in windbreakers with no patches, then SUVs with out-of-state plates. A federal marshal, short woman, East Coast accent sharp enough to cut rope, sat me down with a laptop. "You see this?" she asked, showing me pictures. My stomach dropped. Same brand of binocs, same MREs, same spools of cord. Turns out they'd been hunting him for months. A former Army Ranger named Aaron Wicks vanished after knocking over a credit union in Spokane. Took 400 grand, dropped off the grid, and melted into the Bitterroots like smoke. I told my story 3 more times. Drew maps. Described every knot, every footstep. One of the guys in a windbreaker tapped my sketch with a pen, muttering to nobody. That's textbook perimeter defense. He's running playbook tactics. What made me sick was realizing how close I'd come to never telling them anything. If I'd tripped the wrong wire, slipped on the ridge, or if Wicks had just decided he didn't like me seeing his hide. A week later, that marshal called me. They'd found the stand, the supplies, but Wicks was long gone. Hauled out fast, left half his gear to keep his head start. But he hadn't been idle. They found my old campsite too, the one I'd pitched a half-mile from his wire. They found notes in neat, blocky handwriting: solo hunter, blue tent, Remington, non-threat. He'd watch me eat my dinner, watch my fire, watch me sleep. Decided I wasn't worth it. They never caught him, not yet anyway. Couple more camps turned up, all cleaned out by the time boots hit the ground. I don't hunt that side of the range anymore. Still go out, but it's always the same familiar ridges, the ones I know, like my own garage. Sometimes I catch myself glassing the tree line, looking for glints of a scope or a cam lens. Lena calls it paranoia. Maybe she's right. But somewhere out there, I know Aaron Wicks is still moving, living off the land, setting his wires, making sure nobody ever sees him twice. And I can't help but wonder how many others walked through his snare and never knew how close they came to disappearing forever. If you'd have walked that ridge with me, would you have seen the wire before it caught you? Tell me below, and if you want more stories like this, hit that follow, and let's keep the fire burning.